So, we started a topic last week, and it was titled, Our Church Won't Accommodate Our Autistic Child. Okay, and that was part one of our three-part series. Okay, and then we talked about why the church won't accommodate your child with autism. Okay, so today we're going to talk about why parents shouldn't even want their autistic child to participate in the programs at church. Okay? And this will be part two of this little mini series. All right? So before we get started with today's topic, let me just put out a disclaimer. Not all churches are dismissing children with autism. Okay. There are churches that have special needs programs for children with special needs. There are churches that have autism programs, and they have the capacity for these programs. They have people who are trained. They have the ability to accommodate children, and they have that capacity. Okay? So what I talked about last week and what I'm going to talk about in this series are churches that don't have the ability to do that. I'm not talking about the churches that can accommodate it or that have a ministry for that. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's not possible for the churches who don't have the ability to do so. Okay? So I just want to be clear. There are ministries who have those capabilities. And let me just say this. Most of the ministries, not all, but most of the ministries who have the ability to do that are smaller ministries, I would say. Or at least, okay, I got to watch my words. The people that I've spoken to who have those ministries, many times they're smaller ministries or they're larger ministries who have a larger base of people who are trained in those areas and have a greater availability to be able to accommodate those children. But that's a different topic. I'm talking about churches who can't accommodate. And so families who have children with autism expect this from every church. And I'm telling you why they can't. Or at least I talked about that last week. And so with that disclaimer, these are the churches that we're talking about. Okay? So let's talk about this week, part two, why parents shouldn't even want their child with autism to participate in programs at church that don't have the ability to accommodate your child. Okay? Let's go. The first reason is because they don't have a sensory sensitive environment. Okay. As parents with a child with autism, we understand how sensory sensitive our children are. Okay. If you watched a number of my videos, you may have heard me tell a story about how when my son, Hassan, who has autism, he's 26 now, when he was little, he would be fine. We'd go to a store, and as soon as he'd walk into the store, he'd go like this. And it was because it was the lights, it was the electronics in the room, it was the registers, it was the printers, and it bothered his ears. Sensory. You and I might hear the buzz, but it doesn't bother. We can hear the computers in the room. Big deal. The checkout line, the beeps. But for him, it was overwhelming. So the thing is that if the environment at church where all the other children are is not sensory friendly, it's uncomfortable for your child. Now you might say, well, it's better than the sanctuary where the drums are. It might be, you know what I mean? But the thing is that putting them in a room filled with children with loud noises and a bunch of kids running around with voices and music and lights and That might not be the best thing for them either. Bright lights, loud music, and crowded rooms can overwhelm children with autism. Okay? And few churches, not all, few churches have quiet rooms, visual supports, or sensory tools available. Okay? The next topic, inconsistent routines. You know as well as I do that our autismic children need a routine. The school that you take them to, their ABA therapist, knows their routine, what they need in order to feel comfortable. And the children's church, the program that happens during regular Sunday service, doesn't necessarily have a routine that's comfortable for them. Sunday programming often changes from week to week, which is stressful for autistic children who depend on structure and predictability. Okay? Transitions between worship lessons and activities are rarely communicated visually or consistently for them. Okay? Again, when you have your child in an academic school environment, the program is tailored for them. The personnel, the staff, they're trained knowing this about your child. Children's church isn't. Not usually. Not really. You know what I mean? If the children's church program is what it is and they throw your autistic child in there, it's not tailored for them. It's tailored for the rest of the kids. And, you know, if your kid can keep up, then great. And if he can't, they're going to send them back to church with you. And they're not really as concerned about how your child can adapt to the inconsistent routines. Okay? Not all churches, not all the church members, staff, volunteers, but many of them. Okay. Next, behavioral misunderstanding. This right here. This is what we want to talk about. This right here. This is the main reason. Remember last week, I said that I didn't send my child to church, children's church. This is the main reason why. Behavioral misunderstanding. In so many churches, and forgive me, but I want to say in black churches, but not just in black churches, because I grew up in a white church, okay? But not just in black churches. Many times, children's church, Sunday schools will have old school church mothers, Sunday school teachers, grandmas, black or white, who have an old school way of thinking and teaching and parenting. Okay? And they may not all, but they may not understand and have the patience for your child's autistic behaviors. And so when your child is stimming, when your child gets upset, and the caregiver or the Sunday school teacher in that moment just wants little Johnny to just sit down and be still and be quiet, and he's having a moment, and they want to classify him as misbehaving. My child isn't misbehaving. I need you to be more patient with him and understanding. But if that grandmother has an old school way of disciplining and making an assumption about how a child should or would or could sit in church, and they want to, you need a timeout, you should this and you should that, and talk to my autistic child a certain way because of the way they raise their kids. Yeah, that's going to be a problem. That's why I didn't send my child to children's church. Because now me and grandma got to have some words. And you can't make grandma understand what she doesn't understand. Because that's not your grandma. That's just a nice woman volunteer that's helping out in children's church. But she's been doing this for 30 years. She's raised kids of her own 50 years ago. Or however many years ago. She already has an understanding how to raise kids, and she's going to use those same theories on your child with autism, even if she doesn't have the experience or the background or the training on how to interact with children with autism effectively. Not all churches, I'm just saying. Okay? Meltdowns or stimming can be misinterpreted as misbehavior rather than signs of distress or self-regulation. And the thing is that you may have gotten up that morning and your little Johnny's having a great day. He's got his favorite toys. He's got his favorite snacks. He gets to church. He had a good night's sleep last night. Everything's fine. He goes to church with you. Everything's great. And then he goes to Sunday school and he's experiencing the things that I just talked about. He's experiencing a non-sensory environment and inconsistent routines, and it throws him off. His behavior is erratic. And now you have, the old school Sunday teacher that's rolling her eyes because she's a volunteer. She just wants to teach her lesson in peace. And he's having a meltdown. And she doesn't want to deal with it. And she's going to respond and react the way she does to her own grandkids. I don't want you to treat my child with autism the way you do your neurodivergent grandkids. I don't. That's why I didn't send my kid to Sunday school. Because of that. Some leaders feel unprepared or uncomfortable handling behaviors they don't understand. That. Yeah. Next. They have lack of awareness or exposure. Many churches simply don't know what autistic children need because they've never had training or personal experience. I touched on this last week whenever I talked about limited resources or budget. Because you can hear me say this and simply say, then the church is responsible for training. Again, my experience, maybe not all churches, maybe this hasn't been your experience, but my experience being a member of 3 different churches over my lifespan and being a minister in all of them, okay? My experience has been that it's been hard to find volunteers to participate in children's church in Sunday school. That's been my experience. Maybe your experience is different. Maybe your church. Maybe you have adult volunteers lining up at the door to teach the children. Maybe at your church they volunteer willingly and they don't have to be voluntold. Okay? Maybe that's. But my experience is a little different, and so it's hard to find the funds and the resources and the people who even want to be trained because they feel unprepared and uncomfortable. Or maybe they just don't want to. I think that that's part of the tears that came from the woman's video that sparked this topic for me. I think that's part of her tears. It's not so much that the church just doesn't want to, accommodate autistic children. I think that for her, in her mind, there are people who kind of don't want to deal with. I think that's what it is. Okay, that was a side. That's not in my notes. Lastly, in children's church, there are no individualized support plans. Say your church has a children's church. Okay. And say there are 2 volunteers that do have experience with children with autism. Say they do. Okay? There are no individualized support plans. So, say there are 3 children with autism there, and they're trained, in generalized terms. They don't know each child's you know, what each child's needs are. Not all children with autism are created the same. They're all different. They have different needs. They have different sensory issues. They have different, we're all different. They have a different thumbprint than the other one. So, at the schools, they sit down, they have a plan, they learn who the child is, they do assessments. They're not doing that at church. The kid is there for 90 minutes, 2 hours tops during the sermon. They're not, if the child is there and for a half hour they're fine, and then all of a sudden they have a meltdown. Even the trained person in there may not know what triggered it, not without an individualized support plan. The school might know what your child's triggers are, but the church doesn't know, even if with a trained staff member, volunteer. Unlike schools or therapy centers, most churches don't create or follow a plan that considers each child's unique needs. But not just that, most volunteers aren't there consistently every Sunday either. They rotate. I'm only here on the third Sundays of the month, and I'm not going to be here in July and August because I'm on vacation. You know what I mean? Without clear expectation or goals, volunteers feel lost. So that's why I'm like, I don't even recommend it. Your child goes and you think, wow, they have this ministry and they're willing to accept my child. And then your child leaves and then they're like upset for the rest of the day not because anybody did anything to them, church mother so and so was talking at them, not because she was trying to be mean, but you know what I mean? She's not as patient with your child as she is with the other kids because the other kids listen. You know what I mean? That's not fair. They're not trained to interact with them correctly. There's a behavioral misunderstanding. There's inconsistent routine. It's just not the best environment for your child with autism. Not all churches, but for most churches that don't have the structures and the environment and the accommodations in place. Does that make sense? So I hope that helps. So next week is part 3. We're going to talk about what you should do about it. Because what should we do about it? And there are some things that you can do. Okay? So I hope this helps. Drop me some comments or some questions in the chat if you have any. And I do have a course on my website. I'm going to drop that link in the comment section as well. It's called the Autism Parent Blueprint. If you want more information about that, you can click on the link and take a look at that. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.